Hi, I'm Kevin Rogers, and I'm the Director of Reasonable Faith Adelaide. Tonight we have Trevor Harris, and he's going to speak to us on the 2000th year anniversary of Jesus' baptism. So at this point, I'll hand it over to you, Trevor.
Thank you, Kevin. And as we are aware, with a lot of issues with chronology, there are different dates put into the life of Jesus, including the baptism date. But I want to present tonight what I believe is good evidence for this year being the correct year to celebrate the 2000-year anniversary. Thanks, Kevin. A bit of an outline. We'll look at the census of Augustus, which is a key intro to the topic. And I have a window of 8 to 5 BC for evidence for it. We'll look briefly at the politics and geography of this census. We will also introduce a controversial proposal that the key to understanding Jesus's chronology is, believe it or not, found back in the diary of Noah, the great story of salvation from the great flood. And we'll see evidence pointing to that. We'll look at what that means for Jesus's dates and can they be harmonized. We'll also look at a proposal for where the baptism occurs in the Jordan River, and we'll conclude with some comments about groups looking to celebrate the baptism over the coming years. Now, the evidence for the census is very strong and clear. There is archaeological evidence in that Augustus actually wrote a lot of detail about 3 empire-wide censuses that he made. One was in 28 BC, one in 8 BC, and the other in 14 AD. And we have there the Latin inscription where he goes into great detail about the fact that he was in charge, he was issuing the decrees, and he was doing the ceremony at the end, celebrating the completion of the census. Now, the interesting thing about it is that the census didn't require everyone to travel all over the empire back to their place of birth. That's a misunderstanding. And Luke gets criticized where they think he's implying that's why there was such a tumult around the time of Jesus. It's actually in the gospel as everyone was required to pay their taxes at their place of residence. That is their home at the time of the decree. But if you didn't own a property, you were required to travel to your place of origin. So that's the difference, in that many people were scattered over the empire for various reasons. So if they didn't have property and pay taxes at their place of residence, they were required to travel and pay their taxes there. So that's the explanation of the logistics. Thank you. And we now can get a bit closer to the firm date of when does it start. Now, historian William Ramsay, well-known British historian, explained that there was logistics involved in that most censuses started in August to October to reduce clashing with harvesting and winter conditions. So there were preferred months to start a census. And the other thing he pointed out is in Italy, a census could be done in a year, but if it was a large province in a remote area, it could sometimes take 2 to 3 years for a census to be completed. And we have here a direct quote from that inscription I showed earlier, written by Augustus himself. He says, in the consulship of Gaius Censorinus and Gaius Asinus, I again performed the lustrum, that's a ritual alone with the consular imperium. In this lustrum, that's a celebration of the end of the census, there were 4,233,000 Roman citizens entered on the roll. So this is with those mentioning, that's how the Romans dated, and that's supported as 8 BC. So September 8 BC is the good starting point for this inscription, which is on the web if you want to look it up as Res Gestae. It's his account. And we also need to quickly look at King Herod. A lot of debate about when he dies. There is agreement that the Roman Senate in about 40 BC, late in that year, proclaimed him as King of the Jews. He conquers Jerusalem in July 37 BC, and some date the start of his reign as that year. My proposal I'll explain tonight is Jesus is born in October 5 BC, and 5 BC does get support from a number of scholars today as a good year for the birth of Jesus. And that means in November 5 BC, the wise men from the east arrive and tell Herod they are seeking the baby born King of the Jews, which obviously startles him. We can also work out that in May 3 BC, Herod orders the massacre of the innocents, recorded in the Gospels, but it's not a straight away after the birth of Jesus event, as some read it. It's actually a secretive, systematic murder of boys, and the time frame was given as under 2 years of age in the Bethlehem, Hebron area. And that can be backdated to the birth of John the Baptist. So Herod was actually also trying to kill John the Baptist and anyone connected to his locality near Hebron, as well as the Bethlehem area. And we're also told in the story of Josephus that later in his life, the last few years of his life, Herod developed severe health problems. No surprise that that occurred after that event. There is debate on the death criteria. Josephus states he died just after a lunar eclipse and before a Passover. And currently, with the help of NASA, we have 3 candidates to consider. 4th of March, 4 BC, which can be clearly shown as a bit too early, but it is popular with the scholars. Then there's the 10th of January, 1 BC. That's a maybe eclipse that may work. But the one that I'm supporting, and a number of scholars are now leaning towards it, is there was one in 29th of December, 1 BC. That can be found on the NASA Eclipse website. It's a very good option because it puts Herod dying in January 1 AD, which supports Josephus' reign of 37 years. The next thing to look at is what was the politics in the time of the census. Well, the interesting thing is that to the south of Herod's southern border, there's a kingdom called Nabatea. It was an Arab kingdom, and there was always conflict between Herod's kingdom and the Nabateans, and that's well recorded with battles and a lot of border campaigns going against one another. But it's important to see that in Nabatea, there was civil disorder from 9 to 6 BC, with rivalry between 2 claimants because the king, Obadus III, he's called, had been assassinated, and his son was up against a very evil prime minister, and I'll try to pronounce it, Sileus. I'm not sure if that's correct, but he's the very evil prime minister in Nabatea, and the prince of the king that got assassinated, Aeneas, he becomes Aratus IV, and they, for 3 years, were toughing it out, and eventually Augustus got involved and had a trial in Rome and found the prime minister was the one that caused the assassination. He's the bad boy and had him executed in 6 BC in Rome, all recorded in Josephus. This Nabatea created a major security problem for the Roman census in that region. Travellers using trade routes like the Spice Route and the King's Highway were going through this area. The Roman legate in charge of security for the province of Syria, which included these areas on the border, was Quirinius, whose role is well known. He was not the Syrian civil governor, but he was the military ruler charged with maintaining border security, safety of travellers, and importantly, the collection of taxes. This is why he's named by Luke. So if you keep in mind that part of the movement of people is they're carrying bags of money to pay the census in the towns where they're required to go to. So Quirinius has a key role in the census. And Quirinius would have been the one that probably recommended an extension. If there was a 2-year window initially for the census, he possibly said, look, we're having trouble down south. We will extend it to December in 5 BC, which coincided with a Jewish festival of Hanukkah. And that finished at the end of 5 BC. So that would have been a good window for what we're supporting with the 5 BC date for the travelling of Joseph and Mary. So here you have it graphically shown. We've got Nabatea in modern-day Jordan area, and Petra is the capital down there. And then you can see heading to the northwest via a place called Moa and Avdat, all well-known caravanserai sites that head up to Gaza, which was the main shipping point for all the trade coming from Arabia. So all the spices and rich goods that were promoted from that area found their outlet via the spice route to Gaza and then to the Roman world around the Mediterranean. And Herod's territory included Idumea. He actually was born there. He had a strong connection to that location. That's just to the north of that spice route. So you can see Bethlehem, if it can be pulled down a bit, Kevin, you can see Bethlehem just sits above Marishah there. It's a bit lost on the screen. So a region with a volatile climate in the time of the census. Now, my introduction now is, can we get some evidence supporting the chronology of Jesus? And I believe there's very good support when we revisit Noah's calendar. The Jewish calendar is lunisolar based on moon cycles, and the calculations in this presentation are based on a very popular site called hebcal.com. So they're not my calcs, they're one from a Jewish site working with the lunisolar calendar. Now, the Hebrews had 2 calendars, just like we do. One was devoted as religious, starting with the month of Nisan, and the other one was what's called the civil or legal calendar, starting in the month of Tishri. These calendars are 6 months apart. So the comparison for us today is we have our yearly calendar starting in January, but 6 months later we have the one that everyone gets excited about called the financial year. So 2 calendar systems for 2 different reasons, and the Jews had the same logic. Noah's diary is based on a calendar of 12 lunar months of 30 days, each giving a lunisolar year of 360 days. So this is the pre-flood calendar, not the one we have now with 365 days. But in Genesis, all the events are listed by their numerical order. So it's got a certain number with each month. And to note also is in today's Jewish calendar, the names they put on their months actually date only from the 6th century BC during the exile period. Now, there was a big debate about which month starts Noah's calendar, and it raged quite strongly in the time of the rabbis in 160 AD. And there were two leading proponents, one supporting the religious start and the other supporting the civil date. The rabbis had a big meeting about it, and they decided eventually to support the civil date. And this became the dominant Jewish view, which still holds today. And it was also adopted by many Christian scholars. And it's held by many people today as how you sort out what's going on where in Noah's diary. But I believe a case can be made that a more logical one for Christians is that Nisan is the first month. It helps explain key dates in the chronology of Jesus, and Noah's event dates can be transferred to our post-flood calendars despite the 5-day year difference. So Hebcal does all that for you. So applying now from Noah's account using the religious calendar, we see some interesting things. For example, the 7th month, Tishri, in that proposal, the ark comes to rest. In the 8th month, Cheshvan, the flood waters recede. In the 10th month, the tops of the mountains are seen. In the 11th of Shabbat, the 11th month, the dove returns with a twig. And on the 11th of Shabbat 24, the dove finds a home. And in the 2nd month of the 2nd year, month of Aya 27, Noah empties the ark. So what I'm going to do now is these are key events with specific dates based on a religious calendar. The next slide, thanks, Kevin, is we can actually see parallel principles occurring in Jesus's life with what was happening back with Noah. For example, 7th of Tishri becomes a very good date for the baptism of Jesus. The 8th of Cheshan 27 becomes a good date for the circumcision of Jesus. The 10th of Tevet becomes a good date for the temple dedication. Shabbat 17 in the 11th month becomes a good date for Gabriel visiting Mary. And a week later on Shabbat 24 is a good date for the incarnation. And the 27th of Aya is a very good date for the ascension.
Excuse me, Trevor, can I
Yep.
interrupt?
Yep.
The last 5 points here you got are or the points 2, 3, 4, and 5 are associated with the birth, and the first one is his baptism, and the last one is his ascension. So, so I presume you mean it that the first one is a baptism, which occurred when Jesus was a 30-year-old man or whatever, and
Yeah.
all these events here associated with the birth, and then again you're jumping back to
Yeah.
the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's important to see what's happening is we're not using the chronology that's in Noah and apply it to Jesus's chronology order. What we're doing is we're taking each event as Noah recorded it with a religious month, and then we're looking at how it can correlate to what we know from the Gospels about Jesus's life. So it's not the same order, if that makes sense, in Noah's thing. You've got to see that it's actually a what do you call it? An anniversary connection of an event, not necessarily in the same order that Noah got it. If that makes sense, it's not a sequence. It's a correlation happening.
Yeah, I understand that stuff.
That comes out as I go through now in more detail with each one. So don't get too hung up on the sequence. Get more on how does Tishri compare to baptism? How does Cheshvan connect to circumcision, etc. So we'll go into detail. So here we have it. I put the Noah date up the top, and then I give the Noah event, and then I give the gospel equivalent in my interpretation of it. And then we also get from Hebcal a calendar date with our calendar, giving a day of the week. And with the 5 BC, we know it's winter time. So there it is, the first one, Noah's Shibat 17. The dove returns with an olive twig, relates to Gabriel's visit, which is Tuesday, January 17, 5 BC, which is importantly to note winter time in Israel. And Elizabeth, we're told, had conceived for 5 months. She kept herself hidden for the 6th month. In the 6th month, angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth to a virgin betrothed. And he came and said to her, "Greetings, O favored one, and behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will call his name Jesus." And Mary accepts she's startled at first, but she says, "I will do the Lord's will." Now, the greeting here is a Greek word, chere, I think it's pronounced, which we call hail or rejoice. So it's a rejoicing that's happening with Gabriel's visit. And in the next slide, in Christian art for many centuries, here's an example from 1333 AD by an artist where he depicts Gabriel coming to Mary carrying a olive branch, because in Christian tradition, this peace greeting is symbolized very well with the olive branch. And even today with the United Nations and many groups, the connection of the coming of a greeting of peace with the olive branch is well established. So in Christian art, you have here this, what I call link between the dove coming back to Noah with a symbol of peace. The olive twig can be related to the visit of Gabriel. Now, this is where I got going on the topic. I was intrigued that after the dove comes back, Noah's told to wait a week before the dove eventually finds a home. And I got thinking, why is it a week? Well, it's interesting in that when we read the Gospels at face value, we think, because Mary says, "I'm the Lord's servant," after getting the invitation to be the mother of the Messiah. I believe Mary is a very devout woman. And what happened is on the day that she got Gabriel's invitation, she didn't go straight up and get zapped with the power of the Holy Spirit. I believe she would have spent a week in very intense prayer and devotion, submitting to the Lord. "Lord, not my will, yours. I'll rely on your timing for the event, but I am ready as the handmaiden of the Lord." So that to me makes a lot of sense for a woman in her situation. We're told that she was initially startled by the visit, so it makes sense the Lord gives a week of preparation before the actual incarnation, which would then date to Tuesday, January 30 in 5 BC. So later on, Joseph's quite concerned about the fact that it was a real incarnation. He wasn't living in the house. She was in a house probably provided by her mother. And she is not, what's the word? She's going to let the Lord do his good work in his timing. But it is fulfilling a prophecy from Isaiah. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Now, the interesting thing here, and particularly for women can comment on this, the incarnation has to allow a time of gestation. So if it's happening in January 30, it gives us a clue for a month for the birth of Jesus. Now, with my proposal, we end up with 264 days from the encounter and the incarnation in January. And we all know that I think about 270 to 280 days is a good period for human gestation. But keep in mind, Jesus's gestation's a bit different in that it's not the normal human egg traveling down the fallopian tubes and other things happening before it rests in the uterus. I believe probably the incarnation is a direct action in the combining of the egg from Mary with the work of the Holy Spirit to implant Jesus in the uterus. So slightly shorter period required. I'm not an expert on this, so I'll rely on others to comment on that. So we're now looking at, is there a clue in, if we're accepting this gestation going forward? We arrive in the month of October, and an interesting thing happens in Noah's story where it says the flood reached its maximum point 150 days after the end of the 40 days of rain, day and night rain. And it says God remembered Noah, and at that point there's a turning point and the flood starts to drop away, and I believe that points to the circumcision. Why do I believe that? The connection that Jesus had to be circumcised is mentioned by Luke, that it happens 8 days after the birth. And that's where he gets named officially. And my point here is, if you get this date of 28, which is exactly 150 days after the Noah story with the rain starting, etc., and finishing, you get a date of October 28. Therefore, if you go back 8 days, you get a correct date for the actual birth of Jesus. So that is what my proposal is, as shown there on the bottom there. Noah's Shevan 20 date is actually the first correct Christmas, and it dates to October 25 BC, and it occurs in autumn, not in midwinter. So we get excited about December 25. That's just right in the smack bang coldest time in Israel. I think it makes more sense that he's born in a cave in Bethlehem in autumn. And we get a clue to that from the Gospels, where Luke says during the birth, there were shepherds out in the field. They're not out in freezing cold conditions. They're enjoying an autumn period, a little bit more warmth around. And the angel comes and says, on this day is born in the city of David a Saviour, who is Christ the Lord. So that's my proposal. Controversial. It's not a freezing winter nativity with snow and all that we get the image of. It's actually an autumn event. So the next one to take is a clue that from the birth, under the Jewish law, Mary had to observe a 40-day purity rule. She couldn't take Jesus straight away to the temple after his birth for dedication. She had to wait 40 days minimum. And the proposal is, if you take the dates I just gave you, 42 days after that October date, you get a arrival significantly in Jerusalem, which can be calculated as the Hanukkah festival, and it's on the 7th, back one, Kevin. It occurs on the 7th day. Now, Hanukkah is an 8-day festival. It's a festival of great joy and light, celebrating the rededication of the temple after it had become impure due to previous wars. And we now get a date of Sunday, November 31, which is winter in Jerusalem. And that is where Joseph and Mary take little baby Jesus into the temple. And there is a man there called Simeon down the bottom there who was very righteous and devout. And he was waiting for the consolation of Israel. And the Holy Spirit was upon him. He took Jesus up in his arms and said, "Lord, my eyes have seen your salvation." And tradition says he died soon after that. But he was the right man at the right place, fulfilling a prophecy, and that perfectly fits with our purity requirement with our birth date in October. And the last example is what I call the completion of the mission. So Noah's date, he's the ground is drying off, the floods receded, and God speaks to Noah on Ayah 27, 14 months after the start of the flood. And God basically says, mission over. I want you to take all your family, all the animals out of the ark and go and do a ceremony nearby. And you can say it was the completion of Noah's physical mission, and it's an act of salvation, and they were to celebrate, and the Lord came and visited them. And it's interesting, it correlates exactly with the 40 days after Jesus' resurrection event. We're told that on the Mount of Olives, on the day of ascension, he ascended into heaven. He had completed his mission as required. He'd dealt with sin, he dealt with death, dealt with the devil. He witnessed to the key people, and he is now returning home. And that can be dated to Wednesday, the 15th of May, 30 AD, which is a late spring time. And he also says to them that they'll receive power from the Holy Spirit. They were not to run off after he ascended. They were to wait in Jerusalem to receive the power of the Holy Spirit. And that's the conclusion. So you can see what I'm trying to do is show everything to do with Jesus has its precedent in the Old Testament. And Jesus on the road to Emmaus says to Luke, and I believe Cleopas, he says to them, all the law, all the prophets testify of me. So the story of Noah has this great testimony pointing to what happens in his life, I believe. So it's not accidental. It shows the planning of God at all stages. So just to finish off, I now want to go into a little bit more about the debate on the baptism of Jesus. Now, as you may be aware, if you do a bit of reading on it, some people put a later date than the 30 AD year. And that's because they date it from the death of Augustus. Tiberius, it says, I'll read the quote from a scholar who's a chronologist. Tiberius reigned jointly as co-regent with Caesar Augustus from AD 12 to 14. When the latter died, Paterculus, he was 19 BC to AD 30, a friend of Tiberius, so a contemporary, relates in his history that at the request of Augustus, Tiberius was invested with equal authority in the provinces. Thus, in AD 12, Tiberius's power was already equal to that of Augustus in the provinces. Many would well argue that would be natural for Luke to use for the provincial point of view of the start of his reign. And you can compute the figures there and you get to the 26 AD with that co-regency. And the other second one, which is very important to also support the 26 AD baptism, is Jesus, after his baptism in 26 AD, is at the Passover in 27 AD, and he was told by the priests that the temple begun by Herod in 20 BC was 46 AD. So when you do the maths, that 46 years from Herod starting the temple rebuild through to 26 is definitely the reinforcement for our proposal. The other way. Sorry, there we are. Sorry, Kevin. The ark comes to rest with the baptism in the Jordan. Sorry, I'm getting a bit mixed up there. Apologies. The ark comes to rest, can be related to the baptism of Jesus, and it occurs during the Festival of Tabernacles on the third day of that festival. And with Jesus's time, it happens to be a Tuesday, September 15 in 26 AD. And we're told in Luke's Gospel, in the 15th year of Tiberius' reign, the word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah, and he began proclaiming a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. And then also it goes into detail in John's Gospel, who is an eyewitness, very important to the whole occasion, that the declaration was made, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And John says, "I saw the Spirit come upon him." So what we're saying here is, just as God had a specific site for the landing of the ark, which I believe is in Turkey, there was a specific site for a very good reason. At a particular day, it's actually hovering above the site. The water is still high, but it gradually settles down on the designated site, and that site has support by Islamic, Jewish, and Christian in the region for a long time as the correct mountain. So just as the landing of the ark had to be in the right spot in the water, from the water, Jesus has to be in the right spot in the Jordan River at the designated site. And the controversial proposal I have for the location is it's the same site where the ark was placed by the priests when Joshua took the people across the Jordan. They were directed to place the ark in a designated place in the river such that the people a bit further down could cross over into the promised land. We'll see that in the next few slides. Oh, that's just another added one. We can date the baptism 26 AD date to the time frame of Daniel, where he's given by Gabriel 483 years from a specific time, which dates from, that's an error there, it's 458 BC, not 457. And the computation there is when you add the years and the months, it comes exactly to 483 years. So spot on, Gabriel, you got it right, giving Daniel the right period, and the fulfillment is exactly in the right year. So here's our map. So this is Jordan River coming down to the east of Jericho. And we have a long tradition of Christian sites on the east bank. There's a Byzantine Baptist church there today, and remains of a lot of baptism pools. There's a pilgrim baptism site you can see there on the Israeli side, and to the north of it is my proposed baptism of Jesus site. And the reason I plot it there is this is where the ark is placed by Joshua leading the Levite priests. And the clue is when you get the 2,000 cubit measurement to the south of it. You can see there I've got on the left there the measurement. You come down to a crossing point very close to Gilgal where they were headed. So this is my proposal, that there is a connection between Joshua and Jesus, and the site is of significance. And that's a view today looking down into the Jordan Valley with some historic, mainly Orthodox churches. In the foreground there with the white building is the Israeli side, where all the soldiers are guarding pilgrims coming, because it's an international border, the Jordan River. The Israelis have their soldiers there, but my Jesus baptism site is a little bit more to the north. And our next slide shows it today, where in the foreground is Israel and on the other side is Jordan. And in Jordan's side, I've been to both, there's machine guns and soldiers guarding pilgrims who enter the baptism area from their country. And you can talk to one another quite easily from one bank to the other. And that murky water going through there is the international boundary between the Jordanian kingdom and the Israeli land. For this reason, many pilgrims come on the Israeli side to get baptized. They come by the busload. They love going to where they claim is the locality. It's a little bit out from my calculation, but it gives the intent of what we're trying to illustrate here. People love the idea that they got baptized in water very close to where Jesus got baptized. So all the nations, you get heaps and heaps of pilgrims from many different nationalities lining up under the shadow of machine guns. So now to conclude, 2030, sorry, just go back, Kevin, to that. No, we'll stay with this one. I think we'll go and explain what's happening here. Currently, the baptism date range is from September 26 to September 29. It depends on the start date of key events and the nominated resurrection year. Now, the Jordanian government is very pro-supporting pilgrimage, and they are currently proposing to spend a huge sum of money to promote their side for the baptism of Jesus. It's called the Al-Magath, which means immersion baptism site. They want to support 2030 as a good year to celebrate, and they're planning to build this huge pilgrim centre, including a village, a Palestinian village, and promote it worldwide. And just this year in May 2026, Jordan's King Abdullah inaugurated at this site an international Orthodox university called the Baptism International Orthodox, or BIO University, and it's under the sponsorship of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate. Also, 2033, the Catholic Church is planning their Jubilee of Jubilees, nominated as the year that is very spiritually significant. Events leading up to the traditional date are planned with other denominations. And then another initiative for Protestants is a group called JC 2033. It's an ecumenical vision starting with a chap called Oliver Fleury, who's a YWAM director, Youth with a Mission, that is, received a strong desire to promote the 2000th anniversary of the resurrection of Jesus in 2033. And since then, they've got a headquarters in Switzerland, linking up a whole lot of Christian groups around the world to promote celebration of the resurrection. but part of it is the lead up celebrating the baptism 3.5 years before that. This is the huge village, the Jordanians. I can't read the top there, but it's a $100 million project to get this village and pilgrimage centre going. So that's what the Jordanians are doing. And in conclusion, I summarise my talk with: there's strong evidence to support Jesus' birth in October 5 BC. I find there is considerable historic effort in researching the chronology of Jesus. I've been doing it for 25 years, no shortage of proposals. However, there is little current interest in celebrating the 2,000-year anniversary of his baptism, maybe due in part to differences on the dates. But I do believe a case can be made that Jesus' baptism was 28th of September in 26 AD, and in this year, the Jewish date for Tishri 17 is Monday, the 28th of September. A good day for churches to celebrate would be Sunday, the 27th of September this year. Just as an aside, for those interested in the prophetic dimension, September 2026 is a month that may reveal some significance. Why do I say that? When you do the study of chronology, you do get interesting links between certain events and certain days. So watch out for September this year. Is there anything happening that we might take note of? But my view in conclusion is that any initiatives to promote genuine evangelism is commendable, even if the dates of celebration are different. For example, Christmas, for many centuries, has been widely celebrated around the world, even though there was a 4-year error in the computation promoted in 336 AD. However, I hasten to add, to a group like ours, seeking the true gospel dates is an important responsibility. So thank you for the opportunity of sharing, and I'll now take questions.
Where will stand?
I didn't realise I was muted. So I'll repeat what I said.
Okay.
So, Trevor, thank you very much for that presentation. It was enormous amount of information you presented. I can't say I understood it all, but it was you did a lot of research, and I thank you for providing a lot of the basic information, which perhaps I will have to research a bit more to find out and analyse and understand what you've said.
Yeah, well, as I said, I've been doing it for a very long time. I enjoy the challenge of who's saying what for what reason. And what you see with everything that we have in this topic is your starting point, like Herod's date, hinges on getting the right eclipse. So if you take this eclipse, you come to a certain date. If you get the other one. So they all got over a 4-year period, a variation. Similarly with the baptism, do you count the co-regency, which is well documented when you go into it? There's lots of scholars have found the support for the 2 years. That affects whether you get your early baptism date or the later one. So when you are researching stuff, you've got to be aware that there's an assumption made by all of us. And all I'm trying to do is, for example, when the Jews said, let's run with the civil calendar, there's only one date that correlates for Christians with that proposal, and that is Nisan 17 is the date of the resurrection, quite clearly from the Gospels. And therefore, Christians get excited. Oh, Noah's calendar's got to point it to the resurrection. And that may be true if that's the assumption. But when I went into it, there's a lot more Christian correlations with the religious starting point.
Yeah, well, I was very impressed when I kind of first realised the implications of what the Jews said, that the temple was 46 years and it could be correlated to
Yeah,
um, the beginning of the temple construction, and that had strong historical proof. So I was very impressed, and I said, "Oh, rough enough's good enough, and that's pretty good." But I didn't realise there'd be that much precision associated with it.
yeah. Well, what you also find with scholars, if it doesn't quite fit, they introduce what are called the rubber factor. So, for example, with the temple, was it just the Holy of Holies or was it the whole temple? Which part are we talking about where he starts? Now, Josephus says they deliberately started it in a way that it caused minimum inconvenience to all their festivals. And they only had a very small window of 18 months to basically build the whole thing with the priests. So very tight time frame. But again, there's an assumption there. It has to fit within a very restricted period. And then others come along and say, oh, no, Josephus isn't reliable. It probably took longer and therefore it was later. So when you get the later factor with rubber, you end up with a 3 years on or 4 years on for the Jesus date. If you get what I'm trying to say, it all gets back to how you treat the evidence as to what you sink or swim on.
Mm. Hey, hey, Trevor, just as an observation, if you do look at the Bible, God does take dates seriously and, remembrances and seriously. Perhaps from a Protestant evangelical point of view, we tend to dismiss it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Go around amongst Protestants and start
Yeah.
talking to them about celebrating dates and that you get a blank look.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And even with the work I'm doing, I'm being criticised within my own denomination.
Which is
It's not
ridiculous.
important, that is the comment I get. Not
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. What about astronomically, considering that there was a star that went across the sky that would have shown up? Have they got any evidence of when did that come up in any of the readings or?
Yeah. Well, as you know, there's big debate on what the Star of Bethlehem is. I don't believe it's a astronomical star. I believe there was constellation changes that might be pointers, but my belief is it's called his star. I believe it's a unique astronomical phenomena that came, and it's characteristic to guide the wise men. It had to be in a position always ahead of them, taking them across the Iraqi desert down into Israel, and then it's got to turn if they're on the trade route that's well documented. They have to end up in Jerusalem and then end up in Bethlehem. And it says in the gospel that it appears overhead of the place of birth. So it's a much more dynamic object to meet all that. So I think it's a globe, definitely shining, and it's definitely God directed for obvious reasons, but it's not Venus or Jupiter or anything like that traveling across the land. So I believe it's called his star as something unique for that period.
And Josephus doesn't mention it?
No, well, see, the star is only seen by the wise men, because if you get what I'm trying to say, if it's spiritual as well as obvious to the right people, they can see it, but a non-believer may not have seen it. That makes a bit like, at what is it in one of the occasions where God speaks, and some people said it's thunder and others said God spoke.
Yes.
It's a good example where the
Yeah.
phenomena's there, but if you're an unbeliever, you only hear thunder. And I think it's a bit
That
the
was
same
Paul.
with the star. Paul, was it?
Paul's conversion, like when he was on the road. Yeah, I
Right.
think,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
When I went on the world tour in 2024, cruise, they had information lectures, and there was a series presented by Donna the astronomer. She's an Australian astronomer, and she actually mentioned the possibility of the Star of Bethlehem based on conjunction of planets in.
Yeah.
So she was actually quite supportive of it, and so she wasn't kind of a religious crackpot or something like that. Um,
Yeah,
but she made
I think what she's saying has a point that there could have been movements supporting the time frame, but it's not, I believe, the actual one that's leading the wise men, if that makes sense. In other words, you know how in today's world, we get in the clip somewhere that someone's gone back and checked it. A bit like, what's that famous one, the Bayeux tapestry, the comet, Halley's Comet. Someone's correlated that certain disasters occur after Halley's Comet appears, and you can go through and track, is it a sign of something bad happening? And you can take that view that maybe Halley is what does it call it? A foreboding of something.
Yeah.
So there are movements in the planets and stars that could have spiritual significance, but to then say, therefore, it's the Star of Bethlehem is a different issue, in my opinion.
Mm. 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 What about the John the Baptist reference? She said, I thought that's an interesting take. He was born around the same time, yet escaped
Yeah.
So there's no reference to how they escaped it. Were they actually in the vicinity of Herod saying, kill them all?
Yeah, well, John, as you know, with the Gospels, John is 5.5 months older than Jesus. So his birth date is back in May. His birth date is back in 5 BC. Jesus is 5.5 months later in October 5 BC. The story there, and there's a lot of debate about the fact that there's no record of Herod's massacre. What you have to see is Herod's no idiot. He was worried that some pretender to the throne was going to rock up in his kingdom and usurp his sons who he had lined up to take over from him. So they are nervous about a contentious ruler claiming to be king of the Jews. So he didn't send out his troops, the day after or a week after Jesus's birth and start slash killing any baby in sight. It was a secret, carefully orchestrated campaign where he would have sent his agents into Bethlehem and I believe also Hebron, which is more connected to John the Baptist, seeking out who are the babies already born and who's born in the 2-year period after. So he creates a window of slaughter, and that was done in secret, not in a very public way.
Yeah.
So John the Baptist, I believe, would have been taken by his mother into the desert for safekeeping, the Judean desert. And we have in Christian tradition that his father, Zechariah, actually gets murdered by the Jews because he refused to tell the whereabouts of Elizabeth and his son, John, because he knew the significance of his son. So he was not going to betray him to the authorities who were also in on the Herod campaign.
Could that explain the secret nature of Herod's actions? Could that explain why Josephus does not mention it?
Well, that's right. I mean, Josephus, as you know, is much later, and he's only going on official records. So Herod's not going to put in his official record, today ordered the killing of, so many hundred babies in Bethlehem. I mean, that's bad publicity, but he was genuinely worried. And by the way, he did kill his own son just before he died. So he's quite capable of doing an atrocity. And you remember the famous quote by Caesar, who said it was better to be Herod's pig than his son, because he killed his own son, but he wouldn't kill a pig.
Mm.
Oh,
Very, what's the word?
evil.
Evil, yeah. Yeah.
Why would Herod have been or known about John the Baptist?
Because what happened in the temple in Jerusalem during a Jewish festival, which can be dated to the festival Shavuot in May, he is the high priest going in and doing the ritual and comes out dumb, and everyone would have known about it and were talking about it. So he's a well-known public figure. Something happened, and then later on down in Judah, which is the Levite town that he comes from, there is the birth of his son, and that would have been well known in that district. There was no secret in John's message through Gabriel and his birth in the hometown. So Herod therefore would have known by definition the dates, and that's the clue to the 2-year window. When you go back from what I propose is 3 BC, May 3 BC, you get exactly the birth time of John the Baptist. So Herod's scouring for any candidate who could qualify for a special role.
But the thing that really got him when the wise men turned up was the Messiah, the promised Messiah, and that
Correct.
was who he sent them to look for. And John the Baptist was not in that sort of line at all. He was the priestly line.
Correct. But he would be aware that John the Baptist was a special event that happened in the temple and in the locality he's born in. So he's a, what do you call it, bias. They're related, they're cousins, as you know. They're related. So he's in the net that Herod's trying to weave to get any potential candidate.
Yeah, I'm not sure how close to put that cousins bit, because that could be quite a wide
Well, it can be, but
quite
if
a wide
you
net there.
if you look at it in terms of politics, let's say he's hunting for Jesus and he's not too sure with John the Baptist, he would have been interested to know more about John the Baptist after 2 years. Where is he? What's he doing? And also, is he also another contender? So if Jesus is a contender to the title of king, where does John the Baptist fit in? Well, he's also a contender because he's of the line of David and also specially. So
I'm not sure about that. The relationship was between Mary and Elizabeth. Not quite sure how close that relationship was or distant. They may have been cousins or second cousins. But so far as the Jews are concerned, any claim that John would have had to be king would have come through his father, and his father was a priest to the tribe of Levi.
Correct.
And that's what he would have been known as. So therefore not in the kingly line at all.
Well, no, he's in the bloodline. What I'm trying to say is you've got to see Herod is worried about any claimant to kingship or right to rule. And what I'm saying is he's definitely looking for Jesus, but the John factor is for Herod a worry also because of the bloodline. And as you say, they're probably second cousin or whatever, but they're definitely, it's a little bit like today when someone gets bopped off. They can trace all sorts of ancestral connections. They don't have to be in the same family. England's full of examples of kings who popped up a bit more distant than the direct line in the claim to be royal candidate. The point that comes through the Gospels is the devil was active in Herod trying to stop the plan of God. That's the thing you got to see. There was a spiritual battle going on, and Joseph and Mary have to go to Egypt to flee because staying in Israel would have been too dangerous even with Herod's departure. His son was quite ruthless also.
which is why they went to Nazareth.
Correct. Yeah.
Anybody else got some further comments or questions?
I have a question about the wise men appearing. I've always understood them arriving in the second or third year of Jesus' life as a toddler. And I don't know why. And I think it might have been because that was when Herod started the annihilation of the infants. So has anyone else thought that?
Well, among other things, when Jesus was born, he was born in the stable or cave, however you want to put that. But when the wise men arrived, they found Jesus in a house. So there was at least a bit of a gap there.
Yeah, the point there, sorry, June, I have heard what you said, June. There is a 2-year thing that some scholars support in their argument. Yeah, the issue there, Brian, is two things. One is, I've been to the grotto in question, and there's two parts to it. There is what's called the grotto where the animals were kept, which was normal practice for some of the shepherds to make use of those facilities, and even today they still do. And then there was what you call the more residential side, where Joseph rigged up in the stay there for the 40 days. He rigged up what you would call creature comforts rug, got help from some of the local people that were part of the circumcision ceremony, etc. It made it a more homey environment. So it was quite a comfortable spot to be, is the point that you get if it's got a more domestic. And just nearby in what's called the Milk Grotto today, that has been shown to have been a residence from very old times, showing that grotto residences are common in Bethlehem. They've found quite a few of them over the years.
Yeah,
So it's not brick and mortar houses.
I spoke on Christmas here last December, and I had a slightly different chronology to what you have. So
yeah,
we have different opinions on this.
Yeah, I can see that. And what you're saying, Brian, is what I'm trying to say. In my journey with it, I have come across all the arguments of many different proposals, and all of them have some good points and not so good points. The point is, like all of us, we have to come to our conviction based on what we feel God has shown us. And what I am sharing tonight is I believe there is definitely a link between Noah's story and Jesus's story. And that's the thing I want to present, not to take at face values the rabbis who said, let's start the calendar in a different way. I believe Christians should look more seriously at the religious calendar, and you do get these interesting correlations. For example, exiting the ark on exactly the same day that Jesus ascends to heaven. I say that's no surprise to me, because it's all reinforcing a theme.
So which theory best explains the data?
Well, I say the religious calendar definitely.
Well, that's what you should be aiming for. That's what I'm saying.
Pardon?
That's what I'm saying. Your goal should be to find the theory that best fits the data.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to present tonight. I'm aware that the Jews hold very strongly, but keep in mind it was a group of rabbis after the Christian era who settled on the Tishri date, and that's been their position over many centuries, and they're not going to budge from it now. And a lot of Christians have taken it on board and said, well, we're not going to argue with the Jews. They're experts on chronology. And all I'm saying is let's reconsider.
Yeah, fair enough.
On a slightly different sort of angle, when in the book of Matthew, it talks on the genealogy of Jesus, but it refers not really to Mary but to Joseph as the father, but technically he's his stepfather. Do the Jewish people have a different take on adoption? Even though I know in adoption we consider that they're the children, they become the part of the family. But in Jewish custom, is it even more strong? Is it stronger than it is, say, for us?
I can't really compare. I don't have enough experience to make the comparison other than to say the betrothal connection that's there in the Gospels is actually extremely strong. It's not like our engagement. In our culture, engagement's a little bit, let's test it and see.
Yeah.
Doesn't have a strong legal thing, whereas under Jewish law, the betrothal was legally binding, and if you broke it, as Joseph was considering, you had to get divorced from it in a legal way. You couldn't just do it willy-nilly.
I don't understand why they didn't make it to Jesus, to Mary being the mother, but as being the first one, but they make it to Joseph. So I've heard that they consider it, adoption to be adoption, really, and that would reflect in what Jesus says. We become heirs, co-heirs with him, adopted into the family of God. But and the Mary one isn't really overemphasized. It's really the Joseph lineage. That is.
Well, the two lines we're bringing out two aspects. One is, as you know, the bloodline, which is Mary. The other is the legal one through Joseph, which is to be called the son of David. He had to have royalty. So there are these charts around that clearly show the two lines, although there's different names mentioned, they're totally complementary in showing he is the Messiah, because he's got a bloodline and he's got a legal line. And that's powerful when the two come together with Joseph and Mary. So there's no contradiction that they're bringing out reinforcement to his claim to be the Messiah.
And both lines go back to David.
Correct. Yeah, very important to see that.
I don't think we've ever done a presentation on the two chronologies or genealogies. There's a couple of issues, like how do you actually reconcile the difference, which you just mentioned, and the other is the fact that to the modern reader, where they open the New Testament, start with Matthew, and immediately it starts with this long genealogy, and it's all a bit confronting and boring. What is the significance? Why is a genealogy significant to a Jew?
Well,
so there's several issues that we could address in making
there is a lot of
talk.
Yeah, there is a lot of literature on it, Kevin. There's been heaps of scholars have gone to great pains to point out why the two are important. So the thing I'm trying to emphasize, they're not contradictory, they're complementary.
Yeah.
Reinforces who Jesus is. And Matthew's got his criteria, Luke's got his, and they all bring it together for a reason. And that's how a lot of the things are in the Gospels. Some say, they contradict one another. They don't when you get all the facts together. They don't contradict. They actually complement one another.
Yeah, well, the data's there, but it doesn't get through to the person on the street or the person in the church.
Yeah.
The person on our street. On other streets, it's different.
It does in the Jewish context, definitely. That's what those guys that I was showing about last week, when they make the emphasis, say that the gospel, the New Testament, actually is very familiar to a Jewish person if they were reading it because of the chronologies. Isn't there a whole book in the Old Testament on who begat who?
First 10 chapters of Chronicles.
Yeah. And while from a Jewish point of view, they go from the law as being in the Old Testament, and then they go to this oral tradition, and there's a big jump, supposedly. And there's no connection really. While from the Old and New Testament, there's this like a marrying of the two, becomes like, this is supposed to have happened. It just seems natural. But anyway, that's what they argue.
My point is, I think it's a topic worth covering.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of material, Kevin.
Yeah, well, the challenge for us is how do you do it in a 45-minute video, let alone a 5-minute video, which most people prefer.
Yeah.
Your point about the boredom problem.
Yeah, I was thinking, how do you make it interesting?
I tend to favour your point there, Kevin, but that's like a lot of things in life. We live in an age where it's got to be slick, quick, and get to the point.
Yeah.
We don't want to get bogged down in detail, and chronology is just not a high priority. Like I was trying to say with my topic, I go around and say to people, I'm researching Jesus's dates and baptism. They look at me and say, why is it important? It's not important. And then I say, I'm also looking at the sites, like where was the baptism? And they go, why is that important? And I start talking to them, and then I say to some of them, for example, have you been to Europe? Yeah, yeah. Have you been to London? Yeah. What did you do there? Oh, we went to the church of,
Yeah.
what's his name? The slave trader.
Oh.
His name?
Why is it important?
I said, why did you go there? Well, he got this anti-slavery thing going. So it is important to go to see.
Yeah.
When you go to Athens, I had Australians tell me that they had a holiday in Greece, and I said, "Did you go to Athens?" Yeah, we drove around a bit. I said, "What'd you see?" Oh, there's some old buildings up on the hill, but I thought they're a bit boring. I didn't want to bother with them. So, in their view, the Parthenon's just a pile of rocks. So we all
Well, I'll have you know that I've traced my ancestry using ancestry.com and followed all the links, and I can trace my ancestry back to a king of Wales in the year 350 AD who was slayed fighting a dragon. But nobody will believe me.
Was he slain before or after he had children?
Well, along the way, I found out that some of the sons were born before the father. So in those days, they could time travel.
yeah. Yeah.
So should we believe that you exist or not?
There's a bit doubtful at the moment.
The other comment I was going to make, Kevin, I introduced it on this census issue and the evidence for it. I've come across so many examples on the web where they all say Luke got it wrong. There was no census in the time of Jesus. None is provable.
A connected issue.
And made up, and the dates don't line up, and they really get stuck into Luke. Quirinius is made up. It got it wrong there. And I think what they're trying to say is if he got all that wrong, well, what would you believe about all his other stuff that he's talking about? I believe personally he interviews all the key players. He interviews the Virgin Mary, gets her description of the incarnation and all of that. He interviews people that closely knew Jesus. So he's a historian of the first order, and facts are important with him.
Yeah.
I believe that's why he's chosen to write Acts and why he writes his gospel.
I think at this point we'll terminate the recording, but it would be useful that we actually follow up the talk with the comments on the YouTube site. So we don't just kind of let it die at that point, but do a little bit of research and record that in the YouTube comments. So, happy for me to stop the recording at this stage?
Yep.
Yeah, I
Thanks,
just have
Trevor.
to. Yeah.
Thanks, Roman.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Trevor.